They called it Great Tartary, an empire drawn across maps for centuries, then erased without a trace. Why do the streets of our cities sink beneath the ground? Why do cathedrals echo with power we no longer understand? Legends speak of giants lifting stone as if it were clay. Others whisper of floods, not of water but of mud and silence. What if the maps weren't mistaken? What if history itself chose to forget?
Chapter 1. The Empire. Erased from the maps. Picture this. It's late at night. You're in a quiet library where the air smells of old paper and wood polish. On the table, an ancient map lies open. The ink has faded. The edges are curled. Your eyes trace the lines across Eurasia, from the Caspian Sea all the way to the Pacific. And then you see it. A name written boldly across half the world. Great Tartary. It's not a small note in the margin. It's not a vague label. It dominates the map. A colossal empire stretching across Siberia, Central Asia, and beyond. Some maps even break it down. Independent Tartary, Russian Tartary, Chinese Tartary, an entire world neatly divided as if this empire was as real as France or Spain. And yet, open a history book today. Turn the pages. You'll find no Tartaria, not a chapter, not a mention, not even a footnote. So the question is simple. How can an empire exist on maps for 300 years and then vanish completely? Between the 1500s and the 1800s, mapmakers across Europe drew Tartaria, French, Dutch, German, Italian. They didn't agree on much back then. But here, they all agreed. And it wasn't sketched faintly, not drawn with question marks. It had borders, provinces, names. If it was just a fantasy, why the consistency? If it was just ignorance, why the detail? That's the part that makes you pause, because maps usually disagree. California, for instance, appeared as an island for decades. Sea monsters swam on the edges of the Atlantic. But Tartaria, across map after map, it stayed the same. Massive, detailed, real. So, was it? Then, in the 19th century, the name simply disappears. Gone. The new maps show Siberia, Mongolia, Turkestan, but no Tartaria. Historians say, oh, Tartary was never a real empire. It was just a word Europeans used for unknown lands. Once geography improved, the term faded away. That's the official explanation. But listen carefully. If it was only a vague term, why the exact boundaries? Why the subdivisions? And why the sudden, almost overnight erasure? Names don't usually vanish like that. They linger. They overlap with newer names. They fade slowly. But Tartaria? One century it's everywhere. The next, it's nowhere. And that feels deliberate. Like someone wiped the slate clean. History has done this before. Pharaohs whose names were scraped off monuments, kings erased from chronicles, whole dynasties reduced to whispers. So what if Tartaria wasn't just a label? What if it was something bigger, something inconvenient? Something that needed to be hidden? Was it absorbed by Russia and China who quietly rewrote the maps? Or was it erased by powers that wanted its memory buried? And if so, what secret was worth erasing an empire? Now pause for a moment. Ask yourself this. Could it happen again? Today we trust digital maps, Google Maps, Apple Maps. If tomorrow one of them quietly renamed a region, would you notice? Would you remember a year later? Or would the old name simply fade? Information disappears every day. Websites vanish, articles are deleted, even history books are rewritten. So when you see Tartaria vanish from every atlas in the 1800s, doesn't it feel strangely familiar? Imagine holding two maps side by side. On the left, 1780. Great Tartary sprawls across Asia in giant letters. On the right, 1850. The same space chopped into Siberia, Mongolia, China, Tartaria. It's like looking at two photos of the same family. In one, everyone is there. In the next, one figure has been airbrushed out. The world is the same. And yet, not the same. So what do we make of it? Was Tartaria a phantom empire, or was it real and deliberately erased? The maps whisper one thing, the textbooks another, and between the two there's a silence. If the maps lie, what else lies with them? If names can be erased, what else can be forgotten? Because maybe, just maybe, the evidence isn't gone. Maybe it's under our feet, in the buried streets, in the strange windows half sunk in the ground, in doors that open to nowhere. That is where our journey leads next, to the mud, to the ruins, to the mystery of cities swallowed whole, the enigma of the mud flood. Chapter 2. The mud flood. Cities beneath the streets. Picture a window. Not up on a wall, not looking out at the sky. A window half buried at sidewalk level. Glass staring sideways into dirt, a frame meant for light, now breathing dust. You've seen one, maybe. On an old building, on a quiet block, a row of windows at your shins bricked in, a door that leads to a wall, a staircase that begins at the street and ends at a ceiling. We call it basement, because that's the easy word. But sometimes it doesn't feel like a basement. Sometimes it feels like the ground moved. That's where the whispers start. The whispers about mud, about a flood that wasn't water, about a day when the earth softened, slid, and swallowed anything in its way. Is that true? I don't know. But let's walk slowly through the places where the ground tells a story. Seattle first, a city with a second city underneath, wooden sidewalks above, stone storefronts below, original ground floors turned into underground passages. Windows now look out onto tunnels, doorways open to shadow. The official story is tidy, fires, sewage, a need to raise the streets. They built new roads higher, layer by layer, practical, sanitary, civilized. Maybe that's all it was, maybe. But stand down there for a moment. Run your hand along a dressed stone ledge. Look at the ornate molding, the carved arches, the careful proportions. If these were frontier shops, why so much craft below the street and so much plainness above? Why the steady, almost even depth of burial? Why does it feel like the city didn't grow up, but that the earth rose around it? I'm not saying it did. I'm just saying the quiet makes you wonder. New York, then. Not the skyline, not the lights. Down where the trains hum. They dug the subways, and they kept digging, and the city kept revealing rooms under rooms, vaulted ceilings where no one expected vaults, tiled chambers with patterns you can't see unless you stop, columns resting on older columns, brick behind brick, layers like a cake, but a cake baked without a recipe. Again, there's an official answer. Of course there is. New York built fast. It rebuilt even faster. Streets moved, grades changed. You cover yesterday's entrance and open a new one today. That is sensible. It is also true. And yet when you stand at the edge of a platform and feel the air pull past you, there's a moment when you can sense something else. Not a story. A weight. A history. Pressed flat. Chicago, a city that burned, a city that rose again. They raised streets there too, whole blocks. Jack screws under buildings, turning. Foundations brought up to meet a new world of sidewalks and sewer lines. A brilliant engineering feat, documented, definite. But even Chicago keeps a few questions tucked into its cuffs. Why do some facades show a neat line where ground used to be, as if a muddy hand once rested there? Why do photographs from the years after the fire show handsome buildings with first floors that look like second floors? Why the faint sameness here and in other cities of how far down the old doorways are? Coincidence is a fine word, but it gets used until it's thin. Across the ocean, the story repeats. Paris with houses that seem to sink into the street. London with doors that open onto steps that go down before they go up. Cellars turned into living rooms, windows that stare into planters. And whispers of older floors beneath the present floors, whispers that have the sound of damp stone and old lime. Maybe it's all just city life. Streets rise, water drains, people add and add and add. It's messy, but ordinary. And yet, there's that feeling again. The feeling that someone pressed the world down once, just for a moment, long enough to tuck away a story. People call it the mud flood. Not a flood of water, a flood of earth. Liquefaction, some say. Ground that turns to liquid when it shakes, soil that behaves like water when the right frequency runs through it. You've seen videos, sandbanks that liquefy under vibration, a foot that sinks, a post that leans. Could a city sink that way? Could many, all at once? Or little by little, but close enough together that our maps blinked and missed the truth? Earthquakes offer one explanation, storms perhaps. Volcanic ash carried by wind and rain, turning to clotted sludge in the streets, deltas that rise and fall, rivers that silt and twist. These things happen, they always have. But the theory asks for more. It asks us to imagine something global, a moment of soft ground across continents, a day or a season or a year when the solid world went gentle and everything tall sank a little or a lot. Is that too much? Maybe, but I keep thinking of those even lines. Where stone meets dirt, again and again, at roughly the same height, in cities that never met each other. Seattle again, for a breath. The tour guides show you the old storefronts. They tell the story well. They point at glass prisms in the sidewalks above, the purple jewels that once let daylight down to the original street. They say it was practical. They are right. But there's another thing you notice, if you move quietly. The craftsmanship below. The care. The way stone is carved in places that no one was supposed to see again. Except, someone must have expected those walls to be seen. Because why else make them so beautiful? Unless the plan changed. Unless the ground changed. Unless the city changed its mind because the earth changed its mood. Photos, you've seen them online. Old cities with half-buried windows. Curbs that cover arches, doorways cut in half. Some are hoaxes, sure, some are not. Look at Salt Lake City. Look at Edinburgh. Look at the American Midwest, where towns grew fast and left behind brick patterns that don't quite add up. No single picture proves anything. But together they feel like a chorus, a low hum beneath the explanation. What would it take to make ground turn to syrup? Vibration, pressure, water already in the soil, a resonance that hits just right. Imagine a distant storm that never broke, but still shook the earth. Imagine lights in the sky, like the ones people report before earthquakes, colors on the horizon that have no name. Imagine that, and then imagine the quiet afterward. Streets sticky with silt, doorways swallowed, windows tired and dim at ankle height. You would clean up. Of course you would. You would build new steps. You would plaster the lower panes. You would call it repairs. And after a few years, you would call it normal. But what if it wasn't just nature? What if someone knew how to tune the ground? What if someone played the earth like an instrument? A frequency that made things soft where they should be firm. A song that melted cities. That sounds impossible. It should sound impossible. And yet you hear the small stories. Stories of plasma in old newspapers. Stories of heat that came with no flame. Stories of brick faces glassed over as if kissed by something too hot to see. If you had a technology like that, You would keep it hidden, or you would destroy it, or you would use it once and swear never to use it again. And then you would change the book so no one could ask you about it. You would call the buried windows basements. You would call the half-doors old style. You would call the whole mystery urban growth. It would be easier that way. For everyone, there is always the counter voice. The voice that says, be careful. Don't chase shadows. Cities are messy because people are messy. Sewers need slope, so streets go up. Fires happen, so foundations reset. Immigrants arrive, money flows, the skyline grows, the street grid hardens, and yesterday's ground becomes today's subfloor. Case closed. I respect that voice. I do. It saves us from falling into holes. But the windows are still there. The bricked arches are still there. The old entrances that greet your knees are still there. They don't go away when we rationalize them. They just wait. And sometimes waiting things tell the truth more softly than we like. Let's widen the lens. Look at the timing. The way the name Tartary fades off maps in the 1800s. The way cities around the world start wearing new grades, new curbs, new thresholds at roughly the same moment. No, it's not perfect. Nothing in history is. But the pattern is there if you let your eyes blur a little and see it as a whole. What if the mud in the maps belong to the same story? What if the ground rose as the name fell? What if the last traces of an older order were pushed below the pavement while the atlases learned to forget? It's just a question. But some questions hum. If there was a flood of mud, what did it bury? Just doorways? Just windows? Or whole levels of cities? Streets we don't walk? Rooms that still breathe? Libraries that never got to finish their sentences? Imagine a quiet night. You stand in a basement that used to be a lobby. You touch a column that once held up the main floor. You feel a draft. You follow it. There, behind a panel, a stair that goes down. Dust. Silence. A locked door with a handle rubbed smooth by hands who left no names. You don't go in. You go back up. You tell yourself there was nothing there. And maybe there wasn't. Or maybe it just wasn't your night to know. The mud flood, if it happened, didn't drown us in water. It drowned us in forgetting. It made ordinary people into caretakers of secrets they never asked to keep. It made stone into rumor. It made windows into hints. Could a world do that to itself on purpose? Could it? Would it? If the ground can turn to liquid and back again, what else can change state? Maps, memories, history. We think memory is in the mind, but maybe some memories live in masonry. Maybe that's why the old buildings feel alive in storms, why the air around them shivers when thunder walks by, why some thresholds won't let a draft pass without telling it a story first. I don't need you to believe in a global mud flood. Belief is heavy. Curiosity is lighter. Just carry that. The next time you walk past a building and see a row of windows where your ankles are, stop. Tilt your head. Imagine the ground 3 feet lower. Imagine someone laughing in a light-filled room where you're standing in the rain. Feel the city shift in your bones. Ask a simple question. Did we build up? Or did something push us down? If the answer is obvious, let it be obvious. If the answer is not, let that be okay too. What matters is the hum, the way your mind gently taps the glass and listens, because every hum leads somewhere, and this one, if you follow it, leads to scale, to proportion, to doors too tall and stairs too steep, to rooms that feel like they were made for shoulders broader than ours. It leads to stories of giants, not as monsters, but as neighbors from a time we're not supposed to remember. That is where we go next. Up the steps that used to be taller, through doorways that used to be normal, into halls that hold a different kind of silence. Chapter 3 waits with a measuring tape in its pocket and a question on its tongue. Who were these buildings built for? Chapter 3. Giants in the Ruins. Have you ever stood in front of an old building and felt small? Not just ordinary small, but out of scale. The doorway towers above you, 15 feet high. The staircase rises in long, shallow steps, each one too deep for a normal stride. The ceilings vault upward, so far you feel as if the air itself belongs to someone else. You pause, and you wonder. Who was this built for? They call it the Tartarian style. Grand domes, columns wide as trees, arches that make even cathedrals blush. Some say it was just ambition, architects wanting to impress, big doors to show power, tall halls to lift the spirit. But sometimes it feels like more than ambition. It feels like accommodation, like the builders had someone taller in mind. Let's take a walk. In Iowa, the state capitol building, domes shining like gold, staircases wider than carriages, stonework so detailed it almost hums. In St. Petersburg, Russia, palaces with ceilings that vanish into shadow, doorways that would not look strange for someone twice our size. In San Francisco, opera houses rebuilt after the quake of 1906, vaulted, ornate, out of scale. The same whisper follows you from building to building. Was this for us or for them? The stories of giants are not new. They echo everywhere. In the Bible, the Nephilim, mighty beings who walked before the flood. In Greek myth, the Titans, builders, warriors, larger than life. In Norse sagas, the Jötnar, colossal figures shaping mountains with their hands, and in Native American oral traditions, giants with red hair living in mounds, feared and respected by tribes. Every culture keeps a memory of something taller, something other. Is it coincidence? Or are these scattered memories of the same truth? The 1800s brimmed with strange newspaper stories, mining crews unearthing bones said to be 7, 8, even 9 feet tall, farmers digging up skulls with jaws big enough to fit over a man's head, construction workers finding skeletons with teeth as broad as thumbs. Many of these reports were printed, then quietly forgotten. Some say the Smithsonian collected the bones, only for them to vanish into vaults. Others say it was all exaggeration, tall tales for hungry readers. But if it was just exaggeration, why so many stories? Why so many places all at once? Look again at the architecture, the scale, the proportions, the sense that something about it doesn't quite fit. What if those oversized skeletons weren't legends? What if the buildings were their homes? What if we are the squatters living in the ruins of a taller race? It sounds absurd. And yet, when you place your hand against a door 15 feet high, something in your body whispers back. There are theories. Some say the giants were the builders of Tartaria itself, that the domes, the star forts, the vaulted halls were their design, that they harnessed sound, resonance, and geometry in ways we've barely begun to imagine. Others tie them to Atlantis, or Mu, descendants of civilizations drowned long before, survivors carrying their knowledge into a new age, building until another reset came. And some stretch further still, whispering that the giants were not entirely human, that they carried knowledge from the stars, and that their size was no accident, but a signature, a mark of origin. Skeptics say no, it's all style. Architects love drama. Big doors don't mean big people. Tall ceilings are just symbols of power. The giant bones were hoaxes, mammoth remains misread, or fictions for penny papers. And maybe that's right. Maybe the whole thing is just human imagination. We do love to tell stories about things bigger than us, but then the question lingers. Why are those stories the same across continents? Why do bones vanish when they should be studied? Why does the architecture keep pulling us into proportions that don't quite belong? Step into a cathedral sometime. Clap your hands, hear the sound. It carries, it bends, it wraps around you like a cloak. Theorists say those halls weren't just for worship, they were resonance chambers, built by beings who understood sound in ways we've lost, maybe to heal, maybe to move stone. Maybe to do things we no longer have names for. Now imagine if those beings stood taller, their voices deeper, their footsteps heavier. Wouldn't the halls make sense then? And what of the myths? What if they aren't myths at all? What if they're memories, faded, reshaped, but real? A time when giants lived among us, building with hands that could lift boulders like bricks, carving stones so tight a blade of grass cannot slip between them, leaving behind a scale of architecture that feels wrong and yet strangely right. And when the mud came, when the flood swallowed cities, maybe it wasn't only buildings that were buried, maybe it was them. So the question waits for us, quietly. Were the giants real? And if they were, what happened to them? Did they die out? Were they erased like Tartaria itself? Or do their traces remain hidden under the ground, in basements that aren't really basements, in vaults we're not allowed to see? The answers aren't here yet. Only the questions, and the silence that follows them. But that silence isn't empty. It hums. Because after the giants comes the technology, the airships, the crystals, the free energy that may have lit their cities. And if that's true, then what we've been told about progress, about industry, about the way civilization grew may not be the truth at all. That's where we go next, to the skies, to the ships that floated without wings, to the towers that hummed with power, to the lost technology of Tartaria. Chapter 4. The lost technology of Tartaria. Picture the night sky, silent, calm, and then out of the dark, a massive airship glides overhead. No roar, no smoke, just a low hum, like the sound of a tuning fork pressed against the bones of the earth. Imagine standing below it, watching the giant vessel drift without effort, and then docking not at a harbor, but at the spire of a great domed building. That's the image that haunts the whispers of Tartaria. An empire where flight was not rare, but common. Not noisy, but graceful. Not bound by fuel, but free. The story begins with airships. You've seen the photographs, the old grainy images from the late 1800s, blimps, dirigibles, zeppelins. The official story is simple. They were early experiments, primitive, dangerous, and in the end, doomed. Remember the Hindenburg? The fiery explosion, the end of an era. But there are details that don't quite fit. Reports of airships hovering with eerie stability. Eyewitnesses describing strange lights, not lanterns, not flames, but something like glowing orbs. Sketches of docking towers not for balloons filled with gas, but for ships that seemed to draw power from the sky itself. If these weren't just primitive airships, what were they? That leads us deeper, into the whispers of free energy. The idea that Tartaria had mastered something we can barely grasp today, that the air around us, the earth beneath us, the natural resonance of the planet itself, was their power grid. No wires, no smoke, no oil, just energy. Everywhere. Waiting to be tapped sounds impossible, right? And yet, think of Nikola Tesla. The man who dreamed of wireless power, his Wardenclyffe Tower, a structure meant to broadcast electricity through the air like radio waves, lighting up bulbs across continents. They laughed at him. They cut his funding. His tower was torn down. His papers, some say, they were seized, hidden, locked away. But what if Tesla wasn't inventing something new? What if he was remembering something old, something Tartarian? And then there are the crystals, quartz, piezoelectric stones that produce current under pressure. You've seen them in watches, in radios, small, delicate uses. But what if scaled up? What if entire cities were built as crystal grids? Domes, spires, towers aligned to the Earth's ley lines, energy harvested from the atmosphere, resonating through stone, powering lights, heating homes, perhaps even lifting airships into the sky. It sounds like science fiction. But consider this. Massive quartz deposits exist in Siberia, in the very heart of what maps once called Tartaria. And strange electromagnetic anomalies have been recorded there. Could that be a coincidence? Or a trace of something we're not supposed to see? Then there are the star forts. You've seen them, those geometric fortresses with sharp angles and perfect symmetry scattered across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. The official story says defensive structures, military engineering, designed to deflect cannon fire, and yes, they served that purpose. But look closer. The geometry is too precise, too harmonious, too resonant. Theorists argue the forts weren't just for war. They were energy devices, their angles focusing currents from the Earth, their layouts channeling frequencies, perhaps even acting as nodes in a global grid, a grid that once covered the world, a grid that powered Tartaria. Now, pause here. Think about the timing. In the 1800s, just as Tartaria fades from the maps, we see a sudden wave of world's fairs, Chicago, St. Louis, San Francisco, each filled with massive ornate buildings, neoclassical domes, columns, all built, they say, in just a few months, and then demolished, burned, or dismantled. Why build wonders only to destroy them? Unless they weren't built at all, unless they were inherited, leftovers from another civilization, shown briefly, then erased. The fairs glowed with electric lights, thousands of bulbs strung in the night sky. They said it was new, but some whisper it was not new at all, that it was a demonstration of old power, one last display before it was hidden again. And then, of course, the shadow. The part of the story that makes people nervous. If Tartaria truly had free energy, if its cities ran on the natural hum of the planet, why was it erased? Because free energy is dangerous, not to us, but to those who profit from scarcity. Imagine a world where you never pay for power. No oil, no coal, no gas, no wires. Just air. Just resonance. Who loses? The empires built on oil, the dynasties built on industry, the families who turned black smoke into gold. Maybe that's why Tartaria had to go, not just conquered, but buried, not just forgotten, but erased. The skeptics say it's nonsense. Energy can't come from nowhere. Airships were gas and engines. Star forts were for cannons. World's fairs were plaster and staff, temporary wonders, not ancient relics. And maybe they're right. Maybe every question has a simple answer. Maybe history is exactly what we're told it is. But then you hear the hum in old cathedrals where voices echo like music in stone, the hum in star forts where instruments pick up unexplained electromagnetic surges, the hum in ruins where compasses spin and batteries drain. And you wonder, what if it's not gone? What if it's just sleeping? Imagine this, a future where we rediscover the resonance, where we tune the earth like an instrument and draw power without burning, without drilling, without destroying. Imagine lights glowing without wires, homes warm without fuel, airships silent in the sky, traveling without smoke or wings. Imagine if the past is not behind us, but waiting for us to catch up. That's the promise and the fear of Tartaria's lost technology. And yet, technology is only half the mystery. The other half is destruction. If Tartaria really had this power, what erased it? What reset the world? Some say it was war, some say it was a natural cataclysm. Others whisper it was something even stranger, a mud flood, a fire from the sky. Or maybe something stepping through a portal. The next chapter is darker, because where there is a hidden empire, there are enemies. They called them Gog and Magog, forces from beyond the gates, and maybe, just maybe, they were the hand that closed Tartaria's book. Chapter 5. Gog and Magog. There's a name that drifts through ancient texts like smoke. Two names, actually, Gog and Magog, whispers from the Bible, from the Quran, from medieval maps, always there, always in the shadows, always pointing north. In the book of Ezekiel, Gog is a prince, a leader of nations. His armies rise from the far reaches of the earth, marching down like a storm. In Revelation, they return again, countless as the sand, deceived, unleashed, only to be swallowed by fire from the sky. In the Quran, they're called Yajuj and Majuj, savage tribes, locked away behind a great barrier built by a king named Dhul-Qarnayn. They claw at the wall. They tunnel, relentless, until the last days, when the gate gives way. It's myth, it's prophecy, it's allegory. That's what we're told. But the old maps tell a stranger story. Look at the Catalan Atlas of 1375. It marks Gog and Magog, not as symbols, not as metaphors, but as a place, a land in Asia, the same wild expanse we once called Tartary. 17th century maps do the same, labeling the northern steppes with those names, grave sites of Tartarian kings, borders where no border should be. Why would cartographers write them there, centuries apart, if they were just legend? Some say Gog and Magog weren't metaphors at all. They were Tartaria's enemies, maybe even its destroyers, not tribes of barbarians, but something else, something darker. Invaders who came not by horse, but through rifts, through doors, through portals that bent reality. Imagine the north, Siberia, endless forests, silent tundra, and within it, a gate, a tear in the world, something shimmering, something humming, and from it, them. Strange, isn't it, how often portals appear in myth? Alexander the Great said to have sealed Gog and Magog behind an iron wall. Iraq's ziggurats, rumored in modern conspiracies to hide stargates. Sri Lanka's carvings of stone doors etched with codes, all pointing to the same idea: thresholds. Places where something not of here steps in. Is it coincidence that Siberia, the heart of old Tartary, is one of the most UFO-sighted regions on Earth? Lights over Lake Baikal, orbs in the taiga, craft that hum, then vanish. If Tartaria had guardians, were these their enemies, or their replacements? The whispers grow louder when you look at Sochi. Yes, Sochi, the site of the 2014 Winter Olympics. The opening ceremony was a spectacle of lights, myth, and symbolism. To most, it was just performance, but conspiracy circles dissected it frame by frame. They saw portals in the glowing rings. They saw cities rising, then swallowed by shadows. They saw the failure of one ring to open a glitch, a sign, a ritual. Russia, modern heir to Tartarian lands, telling a story in code, a story of a kingdom lost, a story of enemies named long ago, Gog, Magog. The skeptics roll their eyes. They say Gog and Magog were just metaphors for chaos, for invading tribes like the Scythians or Mongols. They say the maps were mistakes, cartographers copying old errors. They say the Olympics were just a show. And maybe they're right. Maybe it's all allegory. Maybe it's all art. But then why does the name echo in every tradition? Why does it always point north? Why does it cling so tightly to the same lands where Tartaria once stood? What if Tartaria's fall wasn't just mud, wasn't just fire, wasn't just time? What if it was an invasion, not from another empire, not from another nation, but from something else? Something we've tried to describe for centuries without ever naming it clearly. Gog, Magog, the outsiders who come at the end of cycles, the ones who push resets, the ones who step in when the ground turns soft and the sky burns strange. The story isn't over, because if they came once, could they come again? If history moves in cycles, if civilizations rise and fall like tides, then maybe Gog and Magog are not just in the past. Maybe they are waiting, behind a wall, behind a veil, behind a portal. And maybe the hum we hear in the ruins, the anomalies in the sky, the shadows in the north, are the first signs that the gates are stirring. That's the darker edge of Tartaria's mystery. Not just lost technology, not just buried cities, but enemies too old to name and too patient to forget. The question lingers in the silence. Did they end Tartaria? And if they did, are they finished with us? Next, we'll step back from the edge of apocalypse and return to something more human. The children, the trains that carried them. The question of why, after so much erasure, the 1800s were filled with orphans, moved like cargo across a continent, and whether those trains were mercy or part of the reset. Chapter 6. The Orphan Trains. Picture the scene. It's the late 1800s. A train whistles in the dark, carriages rattle across the American plains, and inside, children, dozens, hundreds, sometimes thousands, packed into rows, their faces pale in the lantern light. They are not traveling with families. They are the cargo, shipped westward, town to town, to be placed in new homes. The records call it charity. The history books call it welfare. They call it the orphan train movement. But some whisper another name. They call it repopulation. From 1854 to 1929, an estimated 250,000 children were taken from eastern cities and shipped west. The official story is simple. Cities were overcrowded. Slums were harsh. Parents couldn't afford to care for their kids, so organizations stepped in. The Children's Aid Society, the Foundling Hospital, church groups, philanthropists. The trains were meant to give the children better lives, farms, families, fresh air, opportunity. It sounds noble. It sounds generous. But the numbers don't sit right. Why so many? Why so fast? Why so far? Here's the strange part. Many of these children weren't orphans at all. They had living parents, immigrant families, poor, yes, but not gone. And yet the children were taken anyway, loaded onto trains, scattered across the country, with little record of where they went, with little chance of reunion. Why? Was it really about charity, or was something else at work? Conspiracy whispers. Tie the trains to the resets, the mud floods, the fires, the earthquakes that emptied cities, swallowed neighborhoods and left vast architecture standing eerily vacant. If whole populations were wiped out, how do you fill the empty houses? How do you disguise the ruins of another world? You bring in children, children who don't ask too many questions, children who can be molded, children with no memory of what came before, repopulation by innocence. The Oddfellows play a role here too. A secretive fraternal order sprouting lodges across America during the same era. They built orphanages, they cared for the sick, they buried the dead. That's what the history books say. But step inside an Oddfellows lodge and you'll find strange symbols. Skeletons used in rituals, 3-linked chains, mottos carved in stone. What if their role wasn't just charity? What if they were caretakers of the reset? Handlers of the children who would replace the missing? It sounds wild, and yet their fingerprints are everywhere in this story. And then there's the strangest layer of all, the incubator babies. At World's Fairs, those same fairs with impossible architecture and electric lights, visitors were invited to see something bizarre. Premature infants, displayed in glass cases, hooked up to early incubators, watched by curious crowds as if they were exhibits. The story is that these demonstrations raised awareness, they saved lives, and yes, some did. But others whisper something different, that these incubator babies weren't just premature, that they were manufactured, engineered, grown. Cabbage Patch babies, they were called in rumor, as if children were being produced, not born, to fill the gaps left after catastrophe. And think about the photographs, the old black and white images from the 1800s. Streets of grand cities, columns, domes, bridges, and yet no people, or almost none. Empty avenues, silent plazas, hollow grandeur. The official explanation: long exposure photography. Moving figures vanished. But still, why do the few figures we do see look so strangely small against buildings that seem too big? Were these the orphans brought in to inhabit cities that once belonged to someone else? The skeptics dismiss it all. They say the trains were real, but the conspiracy is fantasy. Children needed homes, farmers needed labor. It was practical, not sinister. They say Oddfellows were just another fraternity. Incubator babies were a medical marvel. Photographs were limited by technology, not mystery. And maybe they're right. Maybe every answer is simple. Maybe tragedy, poverty, and industrial chaos explain it all. But then the questions won't leave. Why so many orphans? Why so secretive? Why so perfectly timed with the erasure of Tartaria and the resets that followed? Sometimes at night, if you listen to the wind by the tracks, you can almost hear it. A faint whistle, a rumble of wheels, the echo of trains long gone, carrying children who vanished into history, carrying a generation that filled the silence left by another. And you wonder, were they orphans? Or were they the last living pieces of a civilization we were never meant to remember? That is the enigma of the orphan trains, not just a story of children, but maybe the final chapter of a buried empire, a quiet repopulation after a loud reset. And if the resets really happened, what caused them? Was it fire, earthquakes, something natural, or were the resets engineered? That's where we go next, into the great disasters of the 1800s, into the fires that burned too hot, the quakes that revealed too much, the floods that buried entire worlds, the age of resets. Chapter 7. The Great Resets. Close your eyes. Imagine the 1800s, a century of invention, yes, but also a century of fire, of earthquakes, of disasters that came one after another. At least that's what the history books say. But what if they weren't just disasters? What if they were resets? The story begins in Chicago, 1871, the Great Fire. It swept through 3 square miles of the city, grand buildings gone in hours, stone melted, glass fused. The official story blames a cow kicking over a lantern in a barn. A cow. For a fire that burned so hot, it left ruins that looked like they had been hit by lightning, or something even stranger. Eyewitnesses described glowing skies, bolts of light, residue on stone that seemed vitrified glass-like, as if touched by plasma. Was this really a barn fire, or a targeted strike, a reset in disguise? Then San Francisco, 1906, the earthquake, a magnitude 7.9. The city torn apart, but the destruction didn't stop with shaking ground. Fires erupted, blocks collapsed, and yet beneath the rubble, workers uncovered entire facades, buried buildings. Structures that looked older than the city itself. The quake didn't just destroy, it revealed. And then the fires came to cover what had been revealed. Coincidence or cleanup? And then there is Siberia, the Tunguska event, 1908. A massive explosion flattened 800 square miles of forest. No crater, no meteor, just a blast, stronger than a nuclear bomb. The official line? A meteor airburst. But no fragments were ever found, no definitive proof. Locals spoke of strange lights before the explosion, glowing skies, energy in the air. Some whispered it was not natural at all, but a machine. A weapon, something Tartarian, malfunctioning, or deliberately destroyed. Was Tunguska the final blow to whatever remained of Tartaria? It wasn't just single events. It was a pattern, city after city, Disaster after disaster, each one followed by rebuilding. New streets raised above old ones, new facades covering buried layers. Seattle, Chicago, Paris, London, everywhere you look, the same story repeats. Buildings with windows underground, doors leading into dirt, entire streets turned into basements. The official answer: urban development, cities raised for sanitation, for sewage, for floods. But when you see it happen across continents, at the same time, you start to wonder, was it really development or was it burial? The resets weren't just physical, they were cultural. Wars erupted, World War I, World War II. Bombings leveled entire cities. But some conspiracy theorists whisper, these weren't just wars of politics. They were cover-ups, excuses to burn, to bomb, to erase the last remnants of something older. Think of Dresden, firebombed into nothing. Think of Hiroshima, flattened in a single flash. Targets, yes, but also cities with layers of history beneath, layers we will never see now. And then, the pandemics. The Spanish flu, 1918, millions dead. A global purge, conveniently timed, some say, to sweep away those who might still remember, those who might still hold pieces of a story we weren't meant to keep. Skeptics, of course, shake their heads. They say fires happen, earthquakes happen, plagues happen. It's history, not conspiracy. And maybe they're right. Maybe it's all coincidence. Maybe the world just had a bad century. But then you start to connect the dots, the fires, the quakes, the floods, the wars, the pandemics, one after another, all clustered in the century when Tartaria vanished from the maps. Is that just history? Or is that a reset? Now ask yourself, if resets are real, who controls them? Are they natural? Cycles of the earth, like storms too big to stop? Or are they engineered? Plasma weapons, energy grids, deliberate strikes designed to clear the slate. And if they are engineered, who decides? Who has the power to wipe entire cities, to bury entire civilizations, and to call it history? The truth is buried, literally, beneath our feet. But sometimes, when a street dips too low, when a basement reveals a hidden window, when a quake shakes loose something it wasn't meant to, you catch a glimpse, a door into dirt, a city below the city, a whisper of what the reset tried to erase. And if resets are real, then what does that mean for us? Are we living in another cycle, another build-up, headed for another wipe? And if so, is there a way to stop it? Or are we, like Tartaria, just waiting for the mud to rise again? That's the mystery of the resets. Not just disasters, but patterns. Not just tragedy, but intention. And when you see it as intention, the past looks different. History becomes a controlled script. Civilizations rise, then are reset, over and over and over again. Next, we'll go deeper still, because before Tartaria there were others. Atlantis, Mu, lost lands whispered across oceans, and maybe, just maybe, they weren't legends either. Chapter 8. Atlantis and Mu. Picture this, the ocean at night, black waves rolling under the moon, and far beneath, at the bottom of the sea, ruins, columns, staircases, pyramids swallowed by coral, cities that once stood in sunlight, now drowned in silence. This is where the story drifts next, to the civilizations that came before Tartaria, the ones we call Atlantis and Mu. You've heard of Atlantis. Plato wrote about it. An island of rings, water, and land in perfect harmony, a naval power, a civilization advanced beyond its time. He said it fell in a single day and night, swallowed by the sea, lost forever. Most dismiss it as allegory, a moral tale about pride and downfall. But what if it wasn't? What if Atlantis was real, and not just real, but part of the same cycle as Tartaria? And then there's Mu, less famous but maybe older, a lost continent in the Pacific, sometimes called Lemuria. James Churchward wrote of it. He claimed he found tablets in India, describing a vast land of harmony, stretching from Easter Island to Hawaii, a motherland of humanity, a place where crystal towers pulsed with energy, where telepathy was common, where ships sailed not with sails but with sound, and then like Atlantis gone, sunk by volcanic upheaval. Scattered survivors left to seed the world. The similarities are unsettling. Advanced civilizations, mastery of energy, sudden cataclysm, total erasure. Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that echo the story of Tartaria? What if Tartaria wasn't the first? What if it was just the latest in a line? A descendant of Mu, a cousin of Atlantis, another bright flame snuffed out before its time. Look closer, and the threads intertwine. Atlantis, in Plato's tale, used a rare metal, orichalcum, glowing red gold. Some say it was a form of crystal technology. Mu, in Churchward's account, also relied on crystals, great grids of quartz drawing power from the earth. Tartaria. Theorists whisper the same: crystal towers, domes and spires as resonators, star forts as nodes in a planetary circuit, 3 civilizations, 3 lost ages, 1 technology. And then, the survivors. Because in every tale, there are always survivors. Atlantis falls, but refugees reach Egypt, building pyramids in the desert. Mu sinks, but survivors reach Peru, leaving behind megalithic walls at Sacsayhuaman, stones so precise you can't slip a blade between them. And Tartaria. If it too was destroyed, then where are its survivors? Did they scatter east into Siberia, west into Europe, south into America? And if they did, could we be their descendants? Think about the myths. Flood stories appear in every culture, from the Bible's Noah to the Sumerian Utnapishtim, to Native American tribes recalling waters that swallowed everything. Why would every culture remember the same thing unless it happened? And what if those floods weren't just water? What if some were mud? What if some were fire? What if each was a reset wiping one civilization so another could rise in its place? The skeptics dismiss it all. They say Atlantis was Plato's imagination. Mu was Churchward's fantasy. Tartaria is internet pseudo-history. But doesn't it feel strange that so many stories align, that so many ruins point to something older than history admits, that so many legends whisper the same warning that civilizations rise, flourish, and fall over and over again? Now think about today. Rising seas, shifting climates, strange lights in the sky. Are we on the same path? Are we living through the beginning of another reset? If Atlantis was erased by flood, if Mu was erased by fire, if Tartaria was erased by mud, then what will erase us? But here's the hopeful thought. If survivors carried knowledge forward, then maybe some of it is still with us, hidden in myths, in architecture, in symbols, in our very DNA. Maybe Atlantis gave us geometry. Maybe Mu gave us spirituality. Maybe Tartaria gave us resonance, and maybe, just maybe, we are meant to remember. Not to repeat the fall, but to break the cycle. The ocean still hides ruins. Pyramids off the coast of Japan, stone steps off Cuba, structures beneath the waves that official history struggles to explain. Are these Atlantis, Mu, or something else entirely? And if they exist, how many more lie waiting? How many whispers of lost worlds sleep beneath the sea? That's the story of Atlantis and Mu, not legends, not fantasies, but maybe the ancestors of Tartaria, the elder civilizations in a cycle of rise and reset. The question is, are we next, or are we the ones who finally remember? Next, we return to Tartaria's ruins, not the grand cities, not the floods or the maps, but something stranger. The giants, the beings who may have built on a scale not meant for us. Chapter 8. Atlantis and Mu. Picture this, the ocean at night, black waves rolling under the moon, and far beneath, at the bottom of the sea, ruins, columns, staircases, pyramids swallowed by coral, cities that once stood in sunlight, now drowned in silence. This is where the story drifts next, to the civilizations that came before Tartaria, the ones we call Atlantis and Mu. You've heard of Atlantis. Plato wrote about it, an island of rings water and land in perfect harmony, a naval power, a civilization advanced beyond its time. He said it fell in a single day and night, swallowed by the sea, lost forever. Most dismiss it as allegory, a moral tale about pride and downfall. But what if it wasn't? What if Atlantis was real? And not just real, but part of the same cycle as Tartaria. And then there's Mu, less famous but maybe older, a lost continent in the Pacific, sometimes called Lemuria. James Churchward wrote of it. He claimed he found tablets in India, describing a vast land of harmony, stretching from Easter Island to Hawaii, a motherland of humanity, a place where crystal towers pulsed with energy, where telepathy was common, where ships sailed not with sails but with sound, and then, like Atlantis, gone, sunk by volcanic upheaval, scattered survivors left to seed the world. The similarities are unsettling. Advanced civilizations, mastery of energy, sudden cataclysm, total erasure. Doesn't that sound familiar? Doesn't that echo the story of Tartaria? What if Tartaria wasn't the first? What if it was just the latest in a line? A descendant of Mu, a cousin of Atlantis, another bright flame snuffed out before its time. Look closer, and the threads intertwine. Atlantis, in Plato's tale, used a rare metal, orichalcum, glowing red gold. Some say it was a form of crystal technology. Mu, in Churchward's account, also relied on crystals, great grids of quartz, drawing power from the earth. Tartaria? Theorists whisper the same: crystal towers, domes and spires as resonators, star forts as nodes in a planetary circuit, 3 civilizations, 3 lost ages, 1 technology, and then the survivors. Because in every tale, there are always survivors. Atlantis falls, but refugees reach Egypt, building pyramids in the desert. Mu sinks, but survivors reach Peru, leaving behind megalithic walls at Sacsayhuaman, stones so precise you can't slip a blade between them. And Tartaria, if it too was destroyed, then where are its survivors? Did they scatter east into Siberia, west into Europe, south into America? And if they did, could we be their descendants? Think about the myths. Flood stories appear in every culture, from the Bible's Noah to the Sumerian Utnapishtim to Native American tribes recalling waters that swallowed everything. Why would every culture remember the same thing unless it happened? And what if those floods weren't just water? What if some were mud? What if some were fire? What if each was a reset, wiping one civilization so another could rise in its place? The skeptics dismiss it all. They say Atlantis was Plato's imagination, Mu was Churchward's fantasy, Tartaria is internet pseudo-history. But doesn't it feel strange that so many stories align, that so many ruins point to something older than history admits, that so many legends whisper the same warning that civilizations rise, flourish, and fall over and over again? Now, think about today. Rising seas, shifting climates, strange lights in the sky. Are we on the same path? Are we living through the beginning of another reset? If Atlantis was erased by flood, if Mu was erased by fire, if Tartaria was erased by mud, then what will erase us? But here's the hopeful thought. If survivors carried knowledge forward, then maybe some of it is still with us, hidden in myths, in architecture, in symbols, in our very DNA. Maybe Atlantis gave us geometry. Maybe Mu gave us spirituality. Maybe Tartaria gave us resonance. And maybe, just maybe, we are meant to remember. Not to repeat the fall, but to break the cycle. The ocean still hides ruins. Pyramids off the coast of Japan, stone steps off Cuba, structures beneath the waves that official history struggles to explain. Are these Atlantis, Mu, or something else entirely? And if they exist, how many more lie waiting? How many whispers of lost worlds sleep beneath the sea? That's the story of Atlantis and Mu. Not legends, not fantasies, but maybe the ancestors of Tartaria, the elder civilizations in a cycle of rise and reset. The question is, are we next, or are we the ones who finally remember? Next, we return to Tartaria's ruins, not the grand cities, not the floods or the maps, but something stranger. The giants, the beings who may have built on a scale not meant for us. Chapter 10. The Lost Technologies of Tartaria. Imagine this. You're standing on a quiet street at night. The lamps glow softly, but there are no wires, no humming transformers, no coal plants burning in the distance, just light, free, clean, endless. That is how some describe the world of Tartaria, a civilization not bound by scarcity, but powered by the ether itself. Start with the airships. Yes, airships. Not the clumsy blimps of the early 1900s, but elegant vessels said to hover silently, drawn along by unseen forces. Old patents hint at them. Grainy photographs show strange crafts in the sky. Not balloons filled with gas, but machines that seem to hum with stability, as if cradled by the air itself. They docked, some say, at the tops of towers. At domes and spires built not for looks but for function, energy receivers, anchors in a global grid. Then there are the star forts, those strange geometric fortresses scattered worldwide. Mainstream history calls them defenses designed to repel cannon fire. But look closer. Their shapes repeat across continents, perfect symmetry, angles aligned to magnetic lines, proportions echoing sacred geometry. Walk inside and the acoustics shift. Whispers bounce unnaturally. Echoes form standing waves. Were these forts really for soldiers? Or were they power stations, drawing currents from the earth, channeling resonance into the sky? Now think of the domes, the cathedrals, the government halls, vaulted ceilings that amplify sound until it rings in your chest. Theorists say they weren't just temples, they were machines, resonance chambers, built to harness frequency, to heal, to energize, to connect. Imagine standing in such a hall, your voice rising, your body vibrating in harmony with the walls, and suddenly light fills the chamber. Energy flows, no wires, no fuel, just resonance. This ties back to Nikola Tesla, the mysterious inventor who dreamed of free energy, of towers that could broadcast power through the air, of cities lit without wires. Some believe Tesla wasn't inventing, he was remembering, tapping into knowledge that survived from Tartaria. His Wardenclyffe Tower, a modern echo of Tartarian domes. The story goes, when financiers realized his tower could provide energy for free, they cut his funding. The tower was demolished, and the knowledge buried again. Coincidence or suppression? And then there are the crystals, quartz, zooelectric stones, capable of storing, amplifying, and releasing energy. Ancient myths speak of crystal towers in Atlantis pulsing with light. Churchward wrote of crystal grids in Mu. And Tartaria, too, is whispered to have harnessed crystals. Some point to Siberia, to vast quartz deposits near supposed Tartarian sites, and to the Tunguska blast of 1908, perhaps the violent failure of a crystal array, releasing stored energy in a single catastrophic burst. Skeptics, of course, dismiss it all. They say star forts were military, cathedrals were symbolic, airships were clumsy blimps, Tesla was brilliant but impractical. And maybe that's true. Maybe there's no conspiracy. Maybe Tartaria had no lost technology. But then why do we find buried windows, sealed chambers, geometries that hum with strange resonance? Why do we see the same architectural fingerprints in cities oceans apart? Why does the story of free energy keep surfacing only to be erased again? The thought lingers. What if Tartaria had solved it? What if they cracked the code of abundance, a society powered not by scarcity, not by coal or oil, but by the very air around us? And what if that was the real reason they were erased? Because free energy doesn't make empires richer, it makes them unnecessary. So next time you see a star fort or stand under a cathedral dome, pause, listen, feel. Does it hum? Does it whisper? Does it carry an echo of a time when the world was lit not by fuel, but by resonance? That is the mystery of Tartaria's lost technologies. Not fantasy, not magic, but perhaps a memory we were never meant to keep. Next, we'll return to the surface of history, to the world's fairs, the strange cities that rose in months only to be torn down again. Were they celebrations of progress or the last glimpse of Tartaria's architecture before the reset wiped it clean? Chapter 11. The World's Fairs in the White Cities. Picture this, Chicago, 1893. The city is still scarred by fire, and yet suddenly a miracle appears. A gleaming white city, 200 buildings, over 600 acres, domes, columns, palaces of light. It looks less like construction and more like revelation. As if an ancient city had been unearthed, dusted off, and briefly displayed to the world. This was the world's Columbian Exposition, a world's fair. But for some, it was something far stranger. The official story is simple. It was built for the fair, temporary, made of plaster and staff, designed to dazzle, then demolished when the fair was over. But look at the photographs, the details, the ironwork, the glass, the sheer scale. How, in just 2 years, with immigrant laborers and horse carts, did they build something so vast, so intricate, so perfect, and then just as quickly destroy it? Why erase such beauty? Why burn what looks like permanence? This wasn't just Chicago. St. Louis, 1904. San Francisco, 1915. Paris, London, New York. World's fairs everywhere, each unveiling cities of grandeur, each rising from mud and chaos in record time. Each demolished soon after, a cycle of display and destruction. Some say these weren't new at all. They were remnants. Tartarian architecture, briefly repurposed, then erased. And think of the exhibits. Alongside the architecture, there were incubator babies, premature infants displayed as curiosities, watched by crowds as if humanity itself was being repopulated. And the electric lights, thousands of them. Glowing in an age still struggling with gas lamps, Tesla's alternating current put on display, power flowing as if the city itself was wired to the ether. Was it demonstration or revelation, a glimpse of Tartaria's lost energy shown to the masses before it was shut down again? Freemasons and Oddfellows leave their fingerprints here too. Organizers, architects, ceremonies thick with symbolism, obelisks, geometric layouts, hidden codes in the very design of the fairgrounds. Were they curators, guardians of old knowledge, or gatekeepers deciding what we were allowed to see and what had to be destroyed? Skeptics dismiss it. They say the White City was plaster, cheap and fragile, never meant to last. They say the demolition was practical. They say the photos prove construction with scaffolds and workers. And maybe they're right. Maybe it was all built and torn down, exactly as history claims. But then you look again. The empty streets and photographs, the sheer impossibility of the timeline, the echoes of Tartarian style in every dome and column. And you wonder, were the world's fairs true celebrations or elaborate funerals, last showings of an inheritance before it was buried for good? Today, little remains. the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, a few fragments in Chicago, a Japanese garden here, a stray dome there. But the white cities as a whole are gone, like ghosts, appearing for a moment, then erased, as if history didn't want them remembered. And yet, they still whisper. In photographs, in blueprints, in the strange feeling you get when you see an old picture and think, this looks too perfect, too advanced, too familiar, and too forgotten. That is the mystery of the world's fairs. Were they marvels of modern ingenuity, or the last flicker of a civilization already erased? Next, we step into the shadows of those who may have orchestrated it, secret societies, odd fellows, Freemasons, the Illuminati. Were they the caretakers of Tartaria's fall or its executioners? Chapter 12. The Secret Societies and the Reset Keepers. Imagine a city in the 1800s, grand halls, ornate lodges, buildings with symbols carved into stone. 3 links of a chain, a square and compass, an all-seeing eye. These were not just decorations, they were marks. Marks of societies that worked in shadows, Oddfellows, Freemasons, Illuminati. And their connection to Tartaria's fall is a whisper that refuses to fade. Start with the Oddfellows, a brotherhood that emerged quietly in the 1800s. Their mission, on the surface, was simple. Help the sick, bury the dead, care for the orphan. But look closer, and it feels stranger. Why so much focus on orphans? Why the obsession with lost children, with repopulating towns after the so-called resets? Their halls stand in cities worldwide, often built in the same grand style as Tartarian architecture, many with basements that sink deep below ground, basements that hold, what? Artifacts, remnants, or something darker. Now, the Freemasons, older, more powerful, everywhere, their symbols etched into cornerstones, into government halls, into the architecture of capitals. They spoke of light, of enlightenment, of building society brick by brick. But conspiracy whispers suggest another role. Gatekeepers of forbidden knowledge, guardians of Tartarian remnants, choosing what survived and what was erased. When cities burned, when floods buried, when fairs rose and fell, the Masons were always there. Coincidence or coordination? And then there's the Illuminati. The name itself stirs unease. Founded in 1776, Bavaria. A group dedicated, they said, to reason, to freedom, to progress. But in the conspiratorial telling, they were never dissolved. They went underground. They infiltrated other societies, and from the shadows they pulled the strings, resets, wars, disasters, all orchestrated. Not random at all, but carefully timed to erase Tartaria's traces, to ensure free energy, giant builders, and resonance machines remained nothing more than whispers. Think again about the orphan trains. 250,000 children shipped across America, many with no records, many vanishing into history. Officially, it was charity, a way to give street kids new homes, but some theorists say it was something else, a repopulation effort to fill the empty shells of cities after the mud floods, to rewrite the bloodlines of a fallen world. Who organized the trains? Who managed the foundling homes? Oddfellows, Freemasons, always the same names. Skeptics say all of this is paranoia, that secret societies were just clubs, that orphans were just children in need, that symbols are just symbols. And maybe that's true. Maybe the Oddfellows were only charitable. Maybe the Freemasons only built. Maybe the Illuminati were nothing but rumor. But if that's true, why are there marks everywhere? Why do their halls echo Tartarian architecture? Why do their names surface again and again whenever resets are whispered? The thought lingers. Were these societies caretakers, trying to preserve fragments of knowledge in the face of disaster? Or were they executioners, tasked with dismantling a civilization so the new order could rise? Look again at those symbols. The all-seeing eye on the dollar bill, the compass and square above government doors, the chain links on forgotten halls. Do they feel like signs of guidance or signs of control? And what do they still guard today? What vaults, what libraries, what ruins lie sealed away by hands that smile in daylight but work in secrecy at night? That is the enigma of the secret societies. Helpers or suppressors, curators or destroyers. No one can say for certain, but their fingerprints remain on the architecture, on the maps, on the very story of Tartaria's erasure. Next, the mystery grows even stranger, because some say the fall of Tartaria wasn't just about men or societies. It was about forces beyond, entities from the north, from legend, from scripture. Gog and Magog, the invaders who broke the gates and ended an empire. Chapter 13. Gog and Magog, the invaders of Tartaria. The Bible tells of them, Gog and Magog, names that echo like thunder across prophecy. In Ezekiel, they come from the far north. In Revelation, they rise at the end of days, savage hordes, unstoppable armies, harbingers of fire. But what if Gog and Magog were not just symbols? What if they were real? And what if their story overlaps with Tartaria? Medieval maps place Gog and Magog in the very same regions once labeled Tartary, beyond the Caspian, deep into Siberia, at the edges of the known world. The Catalan Atlas of 1375 even marks them, Gog, Magog, tribes walled off, waiting to be unleashed. Were these the enemies of Tartaria, invaders that stormed its gates, or forces that burrowed through portals, tearing reality itself? Alexander the Great is said to have built a wall to contain them, an iron and copper barrier hidden in the mountains. Was it myth, or was it a literal attempt to seal an otherworldly threat? And if Gog and Magog were trapped, then who opened the gates, and when? Now think of the Tunguska explosion in Siberia, 1908. A blast that flattened 800 square miles of forest. No crater, no meteorite, just destruction. Official science calls it an asteroid airburst, but some theorists whisper, was it Gog and Magog breaking through again? A portal torn open, a Tartarian defense grid failing. And if so, what came through with that blast? The 2014 Sochi Olympics add another eerie thread, held in Russia on Tartarian land. The opening ceremony was full of symbolism, snowflakes turning into rings. One ring that failed to open, dark forces rising in spectacle while a harmonious city was overrun. Some claim it was not just performance. It was ritual, a retelling of Tartaria's fall, the breach of the gates, the triumph of Gog and Magog. But what were they? Some say they were tribes, nomads, Tatars and Mongols branded with biblical names, demons painted onto history by fearful neighbors. Others say they were not human at all, hybrids, monstrous beings, spawn of ancient gods. And in modern theories, they are linked to extraterrestrials, UFOs flickering over Siberian skies, strange lights near Lake Baikal, spheres crashing in Dalnogorsk in 1986, leaving behind alloys not of this world, demons, aliens, or something in between. The Quran calls them Yajuj and Majuj. Savage peoples, imprisoned until the end of days. They dig and dig at their walls until finally the barrier breaks. Could Tartaria have been that barrier? An empire not just of architecture and energy, but of guardianship, holding back forces that now run loose. Skeptics roll their eyes. They say Gog and Magog were simply enemies, demonized by scripture. They say the maps are mistakes. They say the myths are allegory, and maybe they're right. Maybe Gog and Magog are just names, just shadows. But what if they're not? What if their story is the coded memory of a war too vast to tell? A war where Tartaria fell and something darker stepped into the ruins. The question is chilling. If Gog and Magog already came once, do they come again? Are the wars of today just ripples of that ancient invasion? And if Tartaria was destroyed to contain them, who will contain them now? That is the enigma of Gog and Magog. Not just prophecy, not just scripture, but perhaps the destroyers of an empire erased. Next, we turn to the strangest chapter yet. Not armies, not maps, but children. The orphan trains, hundreds of thousands sent across the land. Were they just charity, or the pawns of a reset to repopulate a world suddenly emptied? Chapter 14. The orphan trains and the children of the reset. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the sound of a steam whistle. A train pulling slowly out of a city station. Inside, not passengers, not cargo, but children. Dozens of them, hundreds. From 1854 to 1929, these trains ran across America. They were called the orphan trains, and they carried over 250,000 children, taken from cities in the East, shipped out to the rural Midwest, to farms, to families, to strangers. Officially, it was charity. A way to give poor children new homes, a social experiment in kindness. But for those who look deeper, the orphan trains hide a darker purpose. Why so many? Why so fast? Why in the exact decades after the mud floods, the fires, the earthquakes, the resets? What if these children weren't orphans at all? What if they were survivors? The last remnants of Tartarian families, stripped of their names, stripped of their memories. Redistributed to repopulate empty cities and rebuild a world after the cataclysm. Think of the photographs from the 1800s, cities with towering buildings, domes, columns, ornate stonework, and yet empty streets, no crowds, no bustle, no life. Long exposure explained some of it, they say. Cameras needed time, people blurred away. But where are the static figures? Where are the workers, the inhabitants? It feels like ghost cities, buildings waiting for new people, children arriving by train. The Oddfellows appear again here. Their mission: visit the sick, relieve the distressed, bury the dead, and educate the orphan. They built orphanages everywhere. They ran homes along the train routes. They welcomed the children. But were they caretakers or handlers? Taking Tartarian survivors, retraining them, reshaping them, preparing them for a new order? And then, the world's fairs. Remember those incubators? Premature babies displayed like exhibits, crowds walking past glass boxes, tiny lives shown as curiosities. Was it just medical progress, or was it something stranger? Some theorists whisper those weren't ordinary babies. They were manufactured, replications, Cabbage Patch children, a bizarre echo of a society trying to refill the world's population. Skeptics push back, of course. They say the trains were simple charity. The cities were crowded with street children, immigrant families too poor to care for them. The fairs were just progress shows. And maybe they're right. Maybe it was all just compassion, all just spectacle. But if that's true, why the scale? Why so many children? Why the missing records? Why the vanished names? And why do the orphan trains coincide so neatly with the timeline of the resets? The thought is haunting. Imagine being a child on one of those trains, your past forgotten, your future unknown, placed in the arms of strangers in a land that doesn't feel like home. What if you carried memories you weren't allowed to keep? Of a buried city, of domes that hummed, of streets where giants once walked. Would anyone believe you? Or would your stories vanish, just like Tartaria itself? So the trains keep running in the whispers. Through the night, through history, through the silence between what we're told and what we sense, were they mercy or manipulation, salvation or a reset? Perhaps the truth is still out there, buried in orphan ledgers, in forgotten family trees, in the hollow echoes of a whistle that once carried children into a new world. That is the mystery of the orphan trains, not just a chapter of social welfare, but perhaps the shadow of a reset, where children replaced civilizations and memory was erased with names. Next, we'll look even further back, beyond Tartaria, beyond the resets, to the great motherlands, Atlantis, Mu, and the idea that Tartaria was not the first lost empire, but only the most recent. Chapter 15. Atlantis, Mu, and the lost motherlands drift back with me, far beyond the maps of Tartaria, far beyond the mud floods, to civilizations even older, even more mysterious. Atlantis, Mu, the motherlands. Stories of continents that once rose proud, then sank beneath the seas, their wisdom scattered, their survivors wandering the earth. Could Tartaria have been their heir? The last branch of a tree that grew from roots we barely remember? Start with Atlantis. Plato wrote of it, a great island empire, concentric rings of land and water, advanced beyond its time, destroyed in a single night of fire and flood. Most call it myth. But then there are the ruins, structures beneath the ocean near Cuba, terraces off the coast of Japan, the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, stones too precise, patterns too deliberate, as if fragments of Atlantis still sleep underwater, and the question remains, did its survivors flee? Did they carry their knowledge to new lands, Egypt, South America, or even Tartaria? Then there is Mu, the forgotten motherland of the Pacific. James Churchward spoke of it in the 1800s, a vast continent stretching from Easter Island to Asia, a paradise of harmony and crystal power, destroyed by volcanic fire and a shifting pole. Academia scoffs. They call it invention, occult fantasy. But the legends of Polynesia whisper otherwise, stories of a lost homeland, of ancestors who came from a sunken land, of knowledge carried in chants, in symbols, in stone statues that still gaze toward the sea. And what of Lemuria? That other lost land, dreamed up to explain the spread of ancient creatures, later absorbed into the lore of Mu. Different names, perhaps the same memory. A world that vanished, leaving only echoes. Think about it. Atlantis in the Atlantic, Mu in the Pacific, Tartaria across Asia. 3 vast domains, each advanced, each erased. What if they weren't separate at all? What if they were chapters of the same story? A cycle of civilizations rising and falling. Each time some knowledge preserved. Each time most of it buried. Now listen closer. Survivor myths appear everywhere. In Egypt, priests telling Solon of Atlantis' fall. In Peru, legends of bearded strangers arriving from the sea. In Tibet, whispers of Shambhala, a hidden kingdom of wisdom. And in Siberia, right in the heart of Tartaria, legends of ancestors who carried knowledge from a land that sank. Knowledge of crystals, of sound, of energy pulled from the air. Coincidence, or fragments of a story that connects them all? Skeptics shake their heads. They say Atlantis is allegory, Mu is fantasy, Lemuria is outdated science. They say Tartaria is nothing more than a name on a map. And maybe they're right. Maybe all these stories are just inventions, just dreams. But then why do the dreams align? Why do myths oceans apart speak of the same things? Floods, fires, lost continents, survivors who seeded new worlds. The thought lingers. What if humanity is older than we're told? What if our history is not a line but a circle, a cycle of golden ages followed by resets? Atlantis erased, Mu erased, Tartaria erased, and now us. Next time you look at a ruin or an old map or even a legend told by a grandmother, pause. Ask yourself, is this just a story or is it a memory? A memory of a time before, of a motherland we lost, of an inheritance we no longer claim. That is the mystery of Atlantis, Mu, and the Motherlands, not isolated myths, but perhaps pieces of the same forgotten puzzle. Next, we turn back to the surface of the 1800s, to disasters that were not just disasters: fires, earthquakes, wars, pandemics. Were they random tragedies, or were they the orchestrated instruments of a Great Reset? Chapter 16. The Great Resets: Fires, Quakes, Wars, and Pandemics, the 19th Century. A time of progress, they say, railroads, industry, invention. But look closer, and it was also a century of disaster: cities burning, earth cracking, skies glowing, millions dying. Were these just random tragedies? Or were they pieces of something larger? A great reset, a cleansing, a deliberate erasure of a world we were not meant to remember. Take Chicago, 1871. A fire that devoured the city, 3 square miles gone, stone melted, metal twisted. The official story: a cow in a barn, a lantern tipped, an accident. But survivors told of strange lights in the sky, of heat too intense for a simple fire, of glass turned to liquid, like plasma poured from above. Was it lightning? Was it weaponry? Or was it an engineered strike to burn away the last remnants of Tartarian architecture? Then San Francisco, 1906. The earth convulsed, buildings toppled, fires raged for days. But when the rubble cleared, something odd appeared. Not just ruins, but intact facades, buried layers, structures that seemed older than the city itself. Had the quake destroyed the city? Or had it uncovered something that wasn't meant to be seen? Travel further east, Siberia, 1908, the Tunguska event, a blast greater than a nuclear bomb, 800 square miles of forest flattened, but no crater, no meteor, just silence. Science says it was an asteroid that exploded in the air, but what if it was something else? A Tartarian device malfunctioning, a crystal array shattering, or the final strike against the Empire's last stronghold. And it wasn't just disasters of earth and fire, it was sickness too. The Spanish flu. 50 million dead. Bodies piled in streets. Some whisper it was no natural plague, that it was engineered, a biological reset, to silence those who still remembered, to bury Tartarian bloodlines under waves of illness. And then the wars. World War I, World War II, cities bombed to ash, Dresden, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. We're told it was strategy, military necessity. But why those cities? Why those places where Tartarian echoes still stood? Domes, star forts, ornate architecture wiped out in firestorms. Was it war? Or was it cover? Excavation by destruction, the past obliterated under the noise of battle. Skeptics will say no. They'll say fires burn, earthquakes shake, plagues spread, wars destroy. And maybe they're right. Maybe these were just tragedies of a turbulent age, but the patterns whisper otherwise. Fires that burn too hot, quakes that reveal more than they ruin, explosions with no meteor, diseases with no origin, wars that target beauty as much as strategy. Too neat, too consistent, too convenient. So the question lingers. Were these disasters natural or orchestrated? Were they tragedies or tools? And if they were tools, then who was holding them? And why? That is the enigma of the Great Resets. A century of chaos that looks in hindsight less like chance and more like design. Next, we'll step into the debate itself, the battleground between scholars and believers. Is Tartaria nothing but pseudo-history? Or is the very act of dismissal part of the cover-up? Chapter 17. The debate, scholars versus pseudo-history. Every mystery has two sides, believers and skeptics. Tartaria is no different. On one side, maps, photos, architecture, stories of mud floods and resets. Evidence, believers say, that cannot be ignored. On the other, historians, archaeologists, linguists who dismiss it all as pseudo-history. Who is right? Who do we trust? The skeptics speak first. They say Tartaria was never an empire, only a word. A label European mapmakers used for the vast unknown lands of Asia, a vague placeholder, not a civilization. They point to travelers like Marco Polo, to Russian records, to Mongol histories, all describing nomads, not domes and airships. And they say the maps were copied mistakes, cartographers repeating one another, errors passed along until the truth replaced them. By the 19th century, they argue, better knowledge erased the name, nothing sinister, just progress. Then they turn to the mud flood, buried buildings, windows below ground, doors that open into soil, not evidence of catastrophe, they say, just engineering. Cities raised for sanitation, streets built higher to escape floods, to install pipes, to manage waste. Seattle, Chicago, Paris. Examples, they argue, not of mystery but of ordinary urban growth. And the giants, hoaxes. Misidentified bones, exaggerated tales from 19th century newspapers. The Smithsonian skeptics say never hid skeletons. There were none to hide. Just mammoth bones, just mistakes, nothing more. Even Graham Hancock, with his theories of ancient cataclysms, is labeled pseudo. Critics say he cherry-picks, that he dismisses radiocarbon dates, that his ideas erase the achievements of indigenous people. And for Tartaria itself, they say the whole idea was born from Russian pseudoscience, from fringe theories, nationalist fantasies, and online echo chambers. In short, they say it's all nonsense, a mirage. But then come the believers. And they ask simple questions. If Tartaria was only a word, why the precise boundaries on maps? Why the divisions Chinese Tartary, Russian Tartary, independent Tartary, as if there was a system, a structure, an order? If buried buildings are just sanitation projects, why the global consistency? Why windows beneath sidewalks in city after city, continent after continent? If giants never existed, why so many stories? From Native Americans to Greeks to the Bible itself, were they all just telling the same lie? And if resets are only coincidences, why do disasters so often strike right where Tartarian echoes remain? Chicago, San Francisco, Siberia, always the same pattern. The scholars roll their eyes, the believers shake their heads. And the truth? It seems trapped in the middle. Maybe Tartaria never existed as an empire, but maybe the erasure of it reveals something else, a gap in history, a blind spot, a silence. Maybe that silence is what draws us in, not just the maps, not just the ruins, but the sense that something is missing, something we were never told. So the debate continues, in classrooms, in forums, on YouTube, in whispers at midnight. Is Tartaria a grand conspiracy or just a grand mistake? The scholars hold their evidence, the believers hold their anomalies, and between them lies the mystery. Not solved, not settled, just waiting. Next, we'll step away from the debate and look at the present, at the strange remnants that remain, star forts, buried windows, buildings that hum, ruins that still whisper. Do they prove anything? Or do they simply remind us that history is never as simple as it seems? Chapter 18. The Legacy, What Remains Today. So here we are, at the end of the trail. We've wandered through maps, through floods, through giants and resets, and yet Tartaria still lingers. Not in the textbooks, not in the museums, but in the world around us, in the stone, in the silence, in the little things that just don't add up. Look at a star fort, one of those strange geometric strongholds with perfect angles, shaped like stars pressed into the earth. History tells us they were military, defenses against cannon fire, but stand inside one, feel the symmetry, hear the way sound carries. Some say they were more than forts. that they were energy devices, resonance chambers, still humming faintly when the solar winds strike. Or look at the old cities, windows buried at street level, basements that were once ground floors, doors that open into earth, construction quirks, they say, raised streets, urban growth. But why everywhere? Why the same depth, the same style, across continents? It feels deliberate, like the surface was laid over something older, something we were not meant to see. Then there are the whispers of sound. Step into a cathedral or an old government hall and speak. Your voice carries, it lingers, it feels amplified, as if the building itself was designed to resonate. Coincidence? Or the last traces of a technology we no longer understand? And the anomalies go further still. Compasses spinning in old domes, electromagnetic surges recorded at forts. Dreams people claim to have after visiting certain ruins, dreams of cities glowing with light, dreams of airships sailing silently overhead. Are these just imagination, or psychic echoes of a world that once was? The skeptics tell us to let it go. That Tartaria is fantasy, that the anomalies are accidents. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe Tartaria endures not because it is proven, but because it is felt. Because something in us knows we've lost a piece of our story, and in searching for Tartaria, we're really searching for ourselves. So as you drift to sleep, think of the old stones, the buried windows, the star forts, the ruins that hum at night. They might be nothing, or they might be everything. They might be the last remnants of a forgotten empire, or they might be the first whispers of something waiting to be found again. And perhaps that's the true legacy. Not proof, not certainty, but the question. What else lies beneath our feet? What else lingers just out of sight? What if history is not what we think it is? That is Tartaria's gift, not answers, but wonder, not closure, but curiosity. The maps are gone, the textbooks are silent, but the whispers remain. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.